Oh, sorry, go on, do you want to? Welcome everybody to Governance and Resource for Thursday, 14th of September at 6 p.m. Before we go any further, I was just going to have a minute's silence for Councillor Tony Morley, who sadly passed this week. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillors Bond and Hughes, substituting our Councillors Franks and Wakeman.
Thank you very much. And next point is approval of minutes from the previous meeting. Do I have a proposer? Thank you, Mr. Buttle. Councillor.
Councillor Buttle, very
Councillor
happy
Buttle.
to approve. I was there.
Do I have a second? Thank you very much. Can we vote on that? To approve? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. I believe, and any turn downs? No. Thank you very much. That was passed. We have no public participation. Thank you. Any interest to declare? Very much. And questions pursuant to rule procedure number 15. And then to first item of business, item 6, external audit strategy memorandum for the financial year ended. I believe we have Mr. Newell, who's going to present to us on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and it's nice to be at the committee. This is my first committee meeting for Derbyshire Dales. I've replaced Gavin Barker. Those of you knew Gavin as the previous engagement lead. Gavin wasn't local to Derbyshire Dales, as you may know, that he was based in the northeast, and so I've replaced him. I'm a little bit more local to him, so it's my first year auditing the council. I'll take the report as read, but there's a few things I'd just touch on, highlight for members, if that's okay.
Please, that would be great. Thank you.
So there is, those of you familiar with our audit reporting and our audit strategy memorandum from previous years, there's very little difference in this from the previous financial year, and that reflects the similarity in the financial reporting for each year. So the audit risks that we highlight on agenda page 29 to agenda page 32 are the same as will have been in the prior year reporting. The only thing that's particularly different for this year 22-3 as opposed to the previous year is that if you've referred to the draft accounts that have been published, you now have a pension asset rather than a pension liability, reflecting the changes in the assumptions and the movements that the pension fund actuary has assessed for you. That obviously is something unusual, and in my career it hasn't happened before, so the audit will focus on that and make sure that we give that the proper testing and scrutiny to make sure it's reported accurately. In terms of our value for money work, which you'll see reported on agenda page 34, or the approach set out on agenda page 34, That follows the National Audit Office's Code of Audit Practice, sets out the criteria that all external auditors have to follow in their work. That focuses on the council's arrangements to deliver value for money. It's not an assessment of whether you have delivered value for money, which is a much more lengthy and complex assessment that we don't carry out as part of the Code of Practice. Again, that's exactly the same as in previous years. So if there are any questions at all, happy to take any questions, Chair.
Anybody wish to ask any questions? Tell us a no. A bit of a proposal.
I will just ask one question, if that's... I mean, last year and previous years, I've always been interested in the approach and understand that the approach to the auditing is on a risk-based. My concerns last year were, I think, that who makes those decisions on risk-based and how those decisions are made. But I'm also interested in the scoping exercise of what we do here and who does what. And it's a very general statement about the scoping exercise of audit. But I wonder if you could fill us in on any detail that might follow. Thank you.
Yeah, no, happy to. So in terms of the decisions around the risks and the risk-based audit, those are decisions that I make as the engagement lead of the team. So the scope of the audit in general terms is set by the National Audit Office's Code of Practice. So they set out the general, you must audit the financial statements and the value for money arrangements. In terms of how we go about doing that, I follow the Mazars audit approach. We have, as all firms will do, a corporate audit approach, which focuses me in certain areas. In terms of the specific scope for Derbyshire Dales Council, so the assessments of risk that we make are very much focused around your numbers in your financial statements. So the sorts of things that we will focus on in assessing things as risk, as you see in here, are things that are large numbers, things that are complex accounting judgments, things that are not known but are accounting estimates. So things like your pension asset is an estimate. You have an expert who says, I'm going to come up with a number for your pension asset based on a methodology and assumptions. That's clearly a greater risk to us of that accounting estimate being wrong, because it's not a known item that I can go and take an invoice and go tick that. I know that's the value of that. So they're very much driven by those things that we think might have a greater risk of being materially wrong in your accounts, if that's helpful. The other thing that we have to take account of are things in the auditing standards that all auditors have to comply with. And you have one of those risks in your audit plan. The management override of controls is a risk that every auditor has to consider, can't rebut, has to carry out testing in order to understand and be satisfied that there has been no management override of controls that's led to material errors in the financial statements. So regardless of our assessment of the risk at the council, and you can see by the table on agenda page 29, the little chart there, where we assess the likelihood and the financial impact of our risks, that management override of controls risk is on the far left-hand side, indicating we don't think that is a likelihood, but I can't rebut it and discount it. So we will test for that to satisfy ourselves that there hasn't been that.
Thank you very much. Anybody else for questions? Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you very much, Councillor. And can I put the vote then, please? All those for? I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Cheers. Next item on the agenda is the Equality Consultation and Engagement Plan, please.
So that one's mine.
I think
Thank you.
believed it, sir.
again, it's a fairly self-explanatory report. It's a report that we bring to committee on an annual basis, and it sets out progress that we've been making on an annual basis against the Equality Consultation and Engagement Plan. The report is fairly self-explanatory. Within it, we highlight 4 areas of success in relation to the plan and the things that we'd set out in the plan over the first year of operation. The resident survey that we did in February of this year, which we'll talk about in the next agenda item, was very successful. Indeed, probably the greatest number of response we've had to a resident survey in my experience of working at authority. Again, satisfaction levels with the parks, very high. A good engagement process with chief execs from businesses across the district, which we are going to give a bit more thought about running again next year, and planning to take forward customer satisfaction surveys with Serco on the waste and recycling service later this year and into next year. Areas where we've not necessarily fully met the targets in relation to the area community forums, but they are under review, and the online panel not being held in November was primarily because we were going to be doing the survey in February anyway, and that's a reasonable approach to take, particularly given the success of the outcomes from that particular survey. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for that. Open to the floor. Anyone got questions? Councillor Buttle.
Thank you. Mike, do we actually have to have area community forums? Are they part of our remit? Or could we just have a community forum for the entire district?
In terms of the council's legal duty, and I may well have to defer to Kerry on this, but the principle is that the district council has to undertake consultation as part of its statutory duties, and particularly where we might be engaging changes to services and policies. There's a statutory requirement to do that. Similarly, in terms of this report, there is a statutory requirement for us to consider the equalities impact of any changes to services and policies. But the way in which we go about undertaking our consultation is at our discretion. So in terms of the question about area community forums, I see that as being one aspect of us undertaking consultation as part of our engagement with local residents and local communities, and that's part of our discretionary approach. So in some respect, the answer is we don't have to do that, but I think for us, it's always been something we've done. It's always been good practice for us to sort of get out there as officers and members with those communities and actually sort of listen to what they've said in their locality and sort of provide them with information about what we're doing and get some feedback from them. So I think it's good practice, but it's not necessarily something we have to legally do.
Thank you. And I suppose the next question is, do we know if it's financially effective? Is it a good method of getting information from people? Or are we better off just sticking a questionnaire on the website?
And I think that's why the Constitution Working Group are actually looking at the area forums and the necessity for them going forward.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Flater.
Yeah, going on from that, I don't think I've been to a community forum for some time because I know under the last regime we were virtually told that councillors weren't there to make comment. It was up to the public to make comment, and some of us took exception to that. But I've highlighted quite a bit in this report, but I'm only going to pick out one thing which is pertinent and relevant, and that is the parish housing needs surveys. and I did mention it to officers earlier on, that Tansley in this area is undergoing now a housing needs survey at parish level. My concern is that we discount what they are doing because obviously we've had things like traffic surveys where the county council said, well, we don't take this on board because we've not done it. I don't want this council to be in the same position and doing that. And what the work that they do wants to be recognised, and we need to encourage all of the parish councils to do this because it costs a lot of money to set up a survey. And we should be giving them advice to carry on and do it and form that partnership with the local parish councils. And I'm eager to see that happens, and what they do is accounted for and respected and is part of our survey, general survey of the Derbyshire Dales.
So I think in terms of the comment that Councillor Flitter makes, I think, you know, as I said before, there is a requirement at a general level for the district council to undertake consultation in regards to the sort of services and policies that it provides and develops as time goes on. The way in which we go about undertaking sort of detailed sort of operational matters allows us to have different approaches to consultation and consultation with different parts of the community, and the parish level surveys that are done to support our housing needs work are an important part of that process, and they enable us to determine the level at which, you know, we invest in the housing needs in those areas to make sure that the needs are satisfied. In terms of the sort of more general point about working with parish councils and communities, you know, that's a very valid point, and I think, you know, that's one we can look at in terms of how we work with parish councils and town councils in engaging them as part of the development of you know, the services and policies that we deliver in the future.
Thank you for that, Chair. Just to say that I think it's important that if we've got a proactive parish council, we should be respecting that and working with them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flitter. Councillor Shelley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to follow up on that, really. I noticed later on the agenda we've got some of the evidence by marketing means for the Derbyshire Dales Plan coming up, which is an absolutely fascinating read. I certainly enjoyed looking through that last night. And it drew my attention to, again, the fact that the council has been very successful in terms of its survey work, so I'd like to credit it with that so far. But I always have this slight niggling doubt that although the surveys are weighted and balanced, they do tend to actually reach those people who are, if you like, maybe the usual suspects, those people who are online, rather than, well, I'm going to say it, sort of younger people perhaps, who are definitely online, but are definitely disinclined to respond to surveys. And as part of our more open approach going forward, I would like to see us certainly considering slightly more adventurous means of surveying members of the local community. I think through parish and town councils, that would be a very, very good step forward. But it might even be things like, with the assistance of some of the members here, if that's permitted, in terms of its balance, street stalls in some of the markets on certain days. I think you might actually reach, or outside schools and colleges, you might actually reach a slightly different audience.
I think, Councillor Shelley, you know, there are a number of different ways in which we can approach consultation engagement with the local communities. Some of those are more appropriate for online approaches, and some are more appropriate for sort of face-to-face engagement, and in some instances we'll end up having a balance between the two, where you've got some that are online and some that are being done face-to-face. And I think what we've got to do in terms of the work we do in terms of the individual services and the areas that we've identified within the plan is determine which is the most appropriate course of action to take relative to the service that's under scrutiny and subject to review. And clearly, you know, as we develop those, and what will tend to happen is that the individual services will bring reports to either this committee or to Community Environment Committee with their proposals for the future. And at those particular points in time, those should set out the methods of engagement and consultation. And at that point in time, it, you know, does give members the opportunity to challenge those service managers and to identify what members might feel might be an appropriate way forward in those instances.
If I may, yes, I think what I'm saying here is building on what we're doing so far, but I'm aware of two things coming up which are going to be very important in this respect. One is that my understanding is that the Scrutiny Committee will be looking at how the Council engages with the public as possibly its first main exercise, unless that's changed without my knowledge. And of course, we've got the local plan process coming up, and I would really hope that would be an opportunity to road test imaginative ways of engaging with the public.
Given that the local plan is also my responsibility, I'm sure we can look at the ways that might be appropriate to do that.
Thank you. Anyone else? I've just got a couple. Thank you, Mike. It's basically just coming through on page 76 and 77, for example. I was just looking at some of the outputs, and it had like March 23 down here, and there doesn't appear to be an output, or if not, like an update in there. Now, perfectly aware that this is a moving feast, but it's just to understand when that's going to get updated and picked up, really as a package, really, because there's a few in there as well. Yeah, that's on my pack. Is that right? Yeah. No, that's fine. There's a few in there as well, basically just picking up where the outputs are as well all the way through there. So there's community safety as well on the next page, and the safety events as well. And it's just to get the quality outputs. If we're doing these things, we just need to pick up what's happened and what we're going to do next to make sure that quality turns into something. Thank you. Anyone else? Do I have a proposal at all? Thank you, Councillor Flitter. Is there a second? Thank you, Councillor. And can I have a vote, please? Everyone for? I think that's unanimous, just to confirm. Thank you. On to the next item, which is the development of the Derbyshire Dales. Oh, sorry, is it? Yeah, quality. Yeah, sorry, we've done that one. Sorry, development of the Derbyshire Dales Plan. If I could, please.
Chair, that one's me again.
Thank you.
The report that you have before you this evening is a sort of combination of looking back at what's already happened in relation to the development of the Derbyshire Dales Plan, the corporate plan for 24 to 28, and also to set out for members the next steps. The corporate plan, as it sets out in the report, is essentially the Council's expression of its policies and priorities. And it's used to facilitate and distribute the financial and human resources we have. With the advent of a new administration, there is a need to update the District Council's corporate plan for the period 2024 to 2028. It's a process that takes some time to complete, and as you'll see in the report, the process was begun before the elections in May, and the first part of that was the appointment of marketing means to undertake the consultation with residents to look at sort of customer satisfaction, but also to look at their degree of sort of prioritisation of the services that we provide to them, and also to try and identify the areas where they think we should be spending money, and also conversely where we potentially shouldn't be spending money. Parallel to that, to make sure we've got a good sense of what it is that is actually happening on the ground out there, we employed CADA Research Limited to provide us with an evidence base of sort of social, economic and environmental data for the district. And the results of that are shown in the appendices to the report. There are a number of sort of highlights that we've presented in the report. One of them being in bold is that the average age, or the median age, is pretty high in relation to comparisons across England. There are only a few other parts of the country that have got higher median ages than Derbyshire Dales residents. There are other issues that we've highlighted in there in terms of the sort of the extent of our weekly wages are the sort of second lowest in the county, and we have a significant issue which has been in existence for a number of years now. Over probably the 20 years that I've worked here, it's always been an issue of expensive house prices relative to weekly wages. We have an increasingly higher proportion of fuel-poor households, and because of the nature of the district, we also have a significant issue in relation to per head of CO2 emissions, which are relatively high. And what those do is give members a sense of what the sort of picture is of Derbyshire Dales. And those are the sorts of, the reason we do that is to essentially to sort of give you the ability to sort of rationalise on what you want to utilise the resources on in delivering the service and facilities that we've got. There's a lot in the report in relation to the outcomes from the resident survey, and also from the workshops that we've held with staff and residents over the course of the last couple of months. I don't really need to go into that because I think it's fairly self-evident in the report. In terms of the next steps will involve the members, and will involve the members coming up with what they think are the appropriate priorities and themes for incorporation within the corporate plan. The first step of that is next Tuesday with a member workshop. Hopefully all members will be there. They've been invited to come along to that. There will be a sort of review of what we've found from marketing means and CADA in a little bit more detail, but it will also give you an opportunity to listen to the consultants that do that work directly. They will be there, not necessarily in person, but virtually to give their own presentation. You'll be able to answer questions on that. We'll also have Peter Dewhurst from Derby University there, hopefully, to look at it from a sort of an outside perspective and give members a perspective of what the evidence is suggesting to people from the outside, so that you can give a lot more thought to how that might influence your thinking about priorities going forward. There's a leaders and CLT away day at the end of next week, and then that will then feed into a second member workshop where a little bit more detail, a bit more flesh on the bones will hopefully come out in terms of the identification of priorities that then can feed into the finalisation of the report, which we anticipate will go to Council in November, and then start to feed into the budget setting process, which will be completed at the March annual budget setting meeting of Council. I don't think there's really any more I need to add to that.
Thank you. Is there any questions from the floor? Councillor Buttle.
Some of it's really quite good news, isn't it? As, you know, like people are looking for a quiet, relaxing, peaceful time, which I can't say I blame them. You know, I'm all in favour of that. When people say they're looking for something like a safe, crime-free and secure life, does that mean they've not got one? And how do we assess that? You know, that's, you know, like these are things which we have to take a view on, don't we?
That's a very interesting question, Councillor Buttle, because on the face of it, when you look at the statistics, certainly in relation to crime, we are the lowest sort of, well, we have the lowest crime rate in Derbyshire. But nevertheless, even though we have the lowest crime rate, there is a perception that crime is still something that creates a bit of uncertainty and a bit of fear for residents. And it's that potential perception that we need to try and think about whether, you know, how much we need to engage with directly or how much we engage with partners going forward. And, you know, I think in terms of the objectives that the residents have set, it's not an unreasonable objective, but one of the things that, as an authority, we will need to address is how much resource do we put in to delivering against that potential objective, if that seemed to be a priority for the authority. And that's the challenge of the corporate plan, is trying to, for members to be able to identify for themselves and for the district what it is the priorities that they want to see delivered upon, and then to decide how much resources, both financial and human, is put into that process. And we'll talk a lot about that on Tuesday next week.
Could I follow up slightly on that one? Because it is really interesting to me, because this is my first ever corporate plan. And I was thinking that it's like the icing on the cake. We provide services, and then we provide an icing on the cake where we actually try to make a difference to the lives of the people that live here. In that icing, do we get to change the way we provide services, or do we continue with the services? Is that part of the plan? When we come together to make a plan, does it cover everything that we provide, or does it cover just bits and bobs where we've got a few quid spare?
In terms of the plan, the plan is there to identify the sort of key priorities for the district, and ultimately what will happen is that it will then filter down into individual service plans, delivery plans for individual service managers, and then that filters down to the individual actions that officers in the teams have to then implement. There are certain aspects of what we do which are statutory, and we have to do those. There's no getting away from the sort of statutory services that we have to deliver. What we've got is an opportunity. What we've got with those is to think, at what level do we deliver those? You know, if there's any latitude for delivering those in different ways and at different standards, that's something we need to consider, because that will potentially have cost implications and human resource implications. But then we've then got more latitude within the discretionary side of what we do. And obviously the discretionary side of things can be quite wide-ranging, and that can be where we look at the aspects of what's coming out from this survey, what's coming out from the evidence, and for members then to decide, okay, you know, there are certain things that we want to address. I'll use these liberally: climate change, economic development, housing, affordable housing, for example, as three topic areas, where, you know, there is the opportunity for members to decide whether or not, you know, they have a gold, silver or bronze standards with regards to that. But what we as officers and you know, Karen and Paul and the corporate leadership team have got to do is to work with you and to try to sort of identify, you know, how to get that balance right between the statutory services that we have to deliver and putting the money into statutory services and also putting the money into the discretionary services where, you know, we are potentially, you know, using money to try and add value to what we do, not necessarily ourselves, but with others at the same time. So that's the challenge that we've got with this whole process. It's not an easy one.
I think it's Councillor Peacock next.
So I was very pleased to see, following on from what Councillor Shelley was saying earlier, that the survey was partly, the big survey was done partly face-to-face in order to capture the younger people. But reading it, it strikes me that that part of the survey is a better random sample than the older residents, because it's much harder to say no to somebody face-to-face than it is to ignore a letter. And so I would be very interested to see if there is significant difference in the results of that part of the survey compared to the other part of the survey. Do you know if there was?
One of the challenges we had with the face-to-face surveys was the weather and the time of year, and because it sort of started sort of March, April time, the weather wasn't necessarily the most conducive to engaging younger people on the streets, and that as a result of the weather actually meant that we were slightly behind in terms of where the final report came into us. But nevertheless, you know, we've been able to pick that up. When the consultants have done all this work, and you'll be able to ask this question to them on Tuesday, my understanding is that, you know, it all goes into a melting pot, and then it's all weighted according to the age and location from which they came, and to try and sort of get that weighting right to reflect the sort of overall distribution of population across the district, both in terms of the geographical spread, but also in terms of the age distribution and the gender distribution as well.
I get all that, but I think there's potentially an additional thing going on there in the data there that doesn't come into that way. But I'll talk to them on Tuesday about it.
Probably better to talk.
Thank you very much. Is it Councillor, was there? No, sorry. Anybody else?
Well, I'll just say that it might astound Mike a little bit, but I'm quite happy with this report. This is the starting block, has been said. It sets the scene for next week's meeting. From there, the leadership team will meet with CLT and thrash it out for a full day. Then we go back to members again before taking it to council. So we take this on board. We look at the options during the next week or so and bring another report through to council. So I'm quite happy, and I'll move it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. Do I have a second? Thank you, Councillor. And could I vote for, please? That's unanimous, I believe. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, item 9, Data Protection and Information Governance Annual Report, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is my report to introduce, and councillors, this is the annual report on the council's compliance with the general data protection regulations, being the Data Protection Act and the Freedom of Information Act. And this is basically giving the statistics over the last 12 months as to how the council has received data protection requests and also FOIs. And with me tonight, I have our Information Governance Officer, who is Mark Mealy, and we have Caroline Leatherday, who is the Business Support Manager, to assist with the FOIs.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the floor? Any questions at all?
I will ask one then if nobody's going to.
Thank you, Councillor Flitter.
Deadly silence again. I'm going to ask the same question I asked in the debrief for officers earlier on, and that is that I'd like to see a way of looking at the Freedom of Information Act and actually seeing how they relate to what subject matter. because that doesn't describe it in here. Something we don't do at the moment, but take, for instance, what was said this afternoon is that it could be waste, it could be travellers, it could be a number of issues. But I feel that unless we actually know what those issues are and why people are looking at Freedom of Information Acts, then we can't adjust what we do. So I think that's an important part of it, and if there can be something done on that, I think it would benefit all members.
I'll take that, Chair. Happy to do that, Councillor Fitter. Can I ask what sort of reoccurrence you'd expect? Would you expect that on an annual basis, or as and when projects or something was gaining interest at that time? How do you want to progress it forward?
No, Chair, I envisage it to come in the normal reporting regime, but I would expect to be alerted if we had a high volume of instances on one particular subject, so that we could readdress that in the medium term.
Chair, I think members of CLT and senior officers, anything that was high volume or issue with regards to an FOI, I think you'd be notified of that instantaneously, because it's obviously an issue at the time. But we can include anything within the report on an annual basis if you wish to identify key areas, or if you just want an individual report on just high volumes. Happy to deal with that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Anybody else? Any other questions? Anybody propose?
Well, I'm going to propose this. I'm going to say that this suggestion that Caroline comes up with a précis of where we're getting FOI could be really useful, because it identifies where people think we're not being transparent. And if we know where we're not being transparent, we can address that. So, yes, I'd love to move it, and thank you very much, Caroline. I think that'd be really good.
Can I just comment to that, Chair? There is actually a disclosure log on our website that all residents, members of public, members can see every single FOI request we receive. That's available now. It's updated on a monthly basis, but obviously I'll cover individual responses separately.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was a proposal, and seconded as well.
Yeah, I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you.
And good report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, and you'll put that to the vote then, please. All those for? Again, I believe that's unanimous. Thank you very much. On to the next item on the agenda, which is the annual governance statement 22-23, pages 235 and 272 of your pack. Karen, if you'd like to lead us on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the report sets out the reasons why we prepare an annual governance statement, why it's an important statement, and what it tells us. The annual governance statement for 22-23 is shown as Appendix 1 to the report. And members can see in Part 3 of the annual governance statement the evidence that we've assessed while preparing the annual governance statement. So we've used a tick, a green tick to highlight successes, and where improvements are required, we've used a yellow warning triangle. Part 6 of the annual governance statement shows governance issues that have been identified. First of all, in the 2021-22 annual governance statement in Part 6A, and in Part 6B, it shows the 5 significant governance issues identified in the 2022-23 statement that need to be addressed during 23-24. On pages 270 to 271 of the agenda pack, there's an action plan to address these 5 significant governance issues. All 5 of these items on the action plan have actually been brought forward from 2021-22 as they hadn't been completed during 22-23. We didn't identify any further areas for improvement. The action plan indicates that all 5 issues will be addressed by March 2024. Once approved by the committee, the annual governance statement should be signed by the leader and the chief executive. It will then be included in the draft statement of accounts that will be shown on our website and be made available as part of the accounts for the public to inspect. It could be brought back to the committee in February if any changes are required prior to the approval of the accounts by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Is there any questions from the floor? No? Do I have a proposer at all? Thank you, Councillor Flitter.
In saying, in moving it, I did ask a question this afternoon. I'm very grateful for the answers that I got through that session from officers.
Agreed.
But there are one or two things. I am actually looking forward to, I think it's the 25th when we meet with Circle Squares. It's a while now since I've read that report, but to be refreshed on the government's arrangements for this council will be interesting. So I'll move it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flitter. Do I have a second? Oh, Councillor Lees. Thank you very much. And can you put that to the vote then, please? Everyone for? Thank you very much. I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, please, is item 10, which I've hidden under here. It's risk management, annual report, updated risk management policy and strategy. Again from Karen. Thank you.
Thank you. This report describes the Council's risk management arrangements and processes. These are to ensure that the Council's risk management arrangements continue to be effective, timely and fit for purpose, and that they provide the Council with the correct levels of insight and support in relation to its risk exposure. The report also asks members to approve an updated risk management policy and strategy, which is shown as Appendix 1 to the report. The key reason for changes within that are to reflect changes in staffing titles and also to reflect a slight change to the reporting up through the organisation. Key issues for risk management are set out in Part 2 of the report, where Chart 1 shows the scores currently against the risks on the Council's risk register, together with the target scores. Appendix 2 shows the mitigating actions for each of these risks, effectively the actions that need to be taken to reduce the score from the current score down to the target score. It's not always possible or desirable to eliminate risk entirely, but I hope that this report and the risk management policy and strategy give members an understanding of the risks facing the Council and how these will be managed to ensure we're able to deliver our objectives and priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to play it back, I believe it's being updated in September. Was that correct? Next.
Yes, the risk continuity group meets quarterly, so the next meeting's the end of the month.
Thank you. It was just because there were some items that looked like they've moved on from this particular risk evaluation. Thank you very much. Any questions from the floor? Sorry. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Shelley, thank you.
So I'll propose that one.
Thank you, Councillor Shelley.
I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. All those for? That's unanimous. Thank you. No, thank you. On to the next item, please. Item 12, which is Treasury Management Outturn Report. Please, thank you.
Thank you. So this report summarises Treasury Management activities in 2022-23 and how they compare with our prudential indicators that were set in March 2022. For the benefit of members that are new to the committee, Treasury Management is the management of the Council's cash flows, borrowing and investments and the associated risks. The Council borrows and invests, in particular, significant sums of money, and it's therefore exposed to financial risks, including the potential loss of invested funds and the revenue effect of changing interest rates. So the successful identification, monitoring and control of risks is important to the Council's prudential financial management. Treasury risk management at the council is carried out under the framework set by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, CIPFA, and that requires the council to prepare 3 reports. The first of these is to set the Treasury Management Strategy, and that goes to council each March. The second is the in-year monitoring report, which will come to this committee usually in November, and the final one is the year-end outturn report, this report that I'm bringing now, and that compares the activities of the year against the target and the codes. So the report itself before you provides details of the external context. 2022-23 was a very unusual year. The last few years have been very static interest rates, inflation and so on. It was quite 7 to 10 years probably at least. But in 2022-23, I'm sure you're all aware, inflation rates rose to very high levels. CPI rose to 11.1%. And RPI hit 14.2%. As we all know, this not only had an impact on the council, but also on the household bills for our residents, and led to the cost of living crisis. In terms of the council, there was a beneficial impact because the Bank of England, in order to control inflation, decided to increase interest rates. And because the council invests large amounts, we do have some borrowing, but that's at a fixed interest rate. So because we invest a lot, that meant that the increased interest rates were beneficial to us, as they gave us over £500,000 more in investment interest than we'd expected. So for the council, the increased interest rates helped to offset some of the costs of inflation. Details of Treasury management activities are given in part 5 of the report, so you can see the levels of borrowing and the valuations on the balance sheet. As I've already said, and is said in the report, the CIPFA code and government guidance require the authority to invest funds prudently, and we have to think about security of the funds before we think about liquidity and yield. So the interest rate is actually the last thing we think about. We need to, first of all, try to invest our money where it will be safe, then where the liquidity, so that means we'll be able to get hold of it when we think we'll need it, and finally we look at interest rates. In terms of liquidity, we don't necessarily need all our money to be immediately available. So during 22-23, the finance team has devoted more time to doing cash flow forecasts so that we can have a better understanding of when we might need our money. And that's allowed us to lend money for longer, which in turn has given us better interest rates. So those two things combined gave us the better returns. Part 7 of the report indicates that all Treasury activities in 22-23 complied with the Code of Practice, so that's good news. And Part 8 of the report measures the Treasury management activities for the year against the prudential indicators that we set in the March 2022. Details of those are in Appendix 1, but one of those indicators didn't comply with the target, and that's the indicator for liquidity, for cash available within 3 months. So paragraph 8.4 of the report explains the background and reasons for the non-compliance, which basically reflects the fact that the market changed and we could also devote more staff time. And as is stated, in reality, the change of the strategy resulted in higher levels of investment income, no reduction in security and no problems in liquidity. And our change of approach was reflected when we set the Treasury management targets and prudential indicators for 23-24 this March, where we reduced that target from £30 million to £7.5 million. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Anyone, any queries? Councillor.
I'd like to thank Karen for this long, lengthy report, as we normally get. And thank you very much, that's all.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Shelley.
I didn't quite understand your last sentence there. Perhaps you could attempt to explain that again, please.
So when we set the target for liquidity within 3 months, back in March 2022, interest rates were at 0.75%, so returns were very low, and also we didn't have a lot of staff time devoted to managing activities. So I think at that time it was felt that we ought to keep £30 million as a cash flow buffer to make sure that we'd always have enough money to meet our needs. Subsequent to that, interest rates went up, and alongside that, we were able to devote more staff time to managing treasury management activities. So one of the things they did was they prepared a more accurate forecasting tool so that they could predict when we would collect money from council tax, business rates and whatever, and when the key items of expense go out of the council's accounts. And those are generally things like the payment of the precept to the county council, things like payments of housing benefits, payments to suppliers. So that became much more sophisticated. And from that, they could see that we didn't actually need to hold as much as £30 million because the flows in and out never got to that level. And if we could keep it lower and manage it better, lower, we could then lend money for longer and get better interest rates. So that's how they achieved that. So in reality, yes, we did breach a target, but it actually made no difference. That what the target is there for is to ensure that we've got money in the bank when we need to pay our bills. We always had that. It was never a problem. We never had to borrow short term to meet a shortfall. So I think it's just better management and higher interest rates.
Thank you. Just another point or two as well. I think you actually let this one out when you were talking, actually, that the gap between the costs to the council through inflation and the benefits through increased interest rates has to some extent coalesced. Could you tell us what that, I don't know if you're able to, if you could actually say what that gap is? In other words, how much more has the increase in inflation cost the council compared to what it's gained through better interest rates?
You're putting me on the spot now, but I tried to calculate that when we did the budget report back in March. Off the top of my head, I think the inflation was just over £1 million, and the investment income here, which wasn't reflected in the budget, I think we only put £200,000 in the budget. That, as you've seen, is about £500,000. So we've had that cushion. The problem we've got is that inflation might stay higher for longer than the interest rates do. So we will, when we do the budget for 24-25, I will apply my usual prudent approach, and we won't be assuming that we'll get such high levels of interest rate going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Flater.
Yeah, and that's why Karen is so valuable to this organisation in being very prudent. I'm just going to ask the same question again that I asked previously for members' benefit. Under 5.16, it says the capital value of the property fund has fallen, which in effect means that the valuation loss does not impact on our budget provision of the authority. And I wondered whether Karen could just enlighten other members to the answer she gave me earlier.
So 5.16 is referring to the value of the CCLA property fund. So this is an investment that the council took out, I about 5 years ago, we invested £1 million. And as you can see from the report, the current value of the fund is 875,466. And we did take out the fund as a long-term investment. We were always advised that there will be peaks and troughs, and that we would need to leave that £1 million in there for long term. And as the previous paragraph points out, we did receive £41,000 in interest during 22-23, and I think we've received interest in previous years, and they've been paid to the council, not reinvested as part of the value. What 5.16 is trying to explain is that while the capital value of the property fund is £875,000, and it is shown on our balance sheet as that, there is what's called a statutory override. So the government have in effect put in place arrangements so that we don't have to account for that loss as part of our revenue account. So in effect, it doesn't fall on the level of the council tax and the council taxpayers. Now, the government has been consulting with Sitva on whether to change that, but at the moment, while there is a loss, that hasn't effectively hit our bottom line because there's a contract to reverse that out. Does that explain it?
What I was trying to bring out was that the income on the interest is on the other side of the balance sheet. So that isn't as bad as it really looks, because there's a compensating factor.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Anyone else? Thank you very much. Could I have a proposal then, please? Thank you very much, by the way, Karen. Excellent. Thank you very much, Councillor. Do I have a seconder at all? Go on, Councillor Buttle. Right. Now put it to the vote then, please. Even 4. Thank you. I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for your time this evening. Is there anything else I need to do? I'll close out.